The print, 29th of November 2023, China aims to invade, divide, and rule Europe. Too bewildered to stop it, the EU. This year's 24th EU-China summit, set for Beijing on December 7 to 8, arrives at a pivotal moment. The outcome will dictate the course of China's challenging relations with the European Union, namely with Central and Eastern European nations under the reorganized 14+1, formerly 17+1, framework. When it comes to China, EU members are significantly divided. For example, France, Germany, and Hungary are pushing for closer ties with Beijing, while the Czech Republic and Lithuania have drifted away from Beijing. These countries occasionally fail to distinguish between their China policy and the more general EU position. Following the COVID-19 outbreak, official trips to China by European officials have increased significantly. The most recent visit, on November 23 to 24, was made by French Foreign Minister Colonna. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz made previous visits to China in November 2022, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez Pérez-Castejón in March, and French President Emmanuel Macron and President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen in April. These may be signs of China trying to curry favor with its European peers. For example, the nation unilaterally declared that nationals of France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and the Netherlands would not need a visa to enter for 15 days. This decision provides insights into China's European policy and attempts to make peace with people with favorable views toward Beijing, even though it does not signal a significant shift. China's media draws attention to Europe's hypocrisy. China is working to improve relations with Europe. Members of the European Parliament, MEPs, have surprisingly positive emotions about the country, which is reinforced by the state-run media in the country. For example, Irish MEP Claire Daly recently spoke with CGTN in an exclusive interview, describing the EU's approach to China as historically arrogant and attributing it to their colonial mindsets. Similar words were used in an editorial by Global Times, which stated, "Many European politicians continue to maintain their assertive and arrogant stance, but the foundations supporting their arrogance are gradually weakening." Chinese media have regularly interviewed a pro-China Member of Parliament, Mike Wallace, who has shared his opinions on a microblogging platform. One of his well-known opinions, which caught the interest of Chinese social media users, contrasts the EU's position on the Israel-Hamas conflict with its attitude on human rights in Xinjiang. The European Union wishes to discuss Hong Kong's human rights. Chinese police did not kill a demonstrator, yet the same EU encouraged the massacre in Gaza. Over 13,000 civilians were killed in 50 days by the far-right Israeli regime. The EU is usually on the wrong side these days, he declared. Nonetheless, unlike Daly and Wallace, several MEPs have emphasized the importance of the EU's approach to managing relations with China. In an interview with the China-approved German think tank Mercator Institute for China Studies, MERIX, MEP Reinhard Bütikofer emphasized his country's approach to China. European unity vis-à-vis China will always be fragile as long as we have to worry that the Chancellery equates German and European interests with those of the overly China-dependent German car industry. It's interesting to note that because of her more assertive views towards China, von der Leyen is not the most famous on Weibo. One user pointed out that von der Leyen is not allowed to handle foreign affairs and that China is to blame for the escalation in Gaza, even though the EU constitution states otherwise. When the EU opened anti-subsidy investigations into its imports of battery electric vehicles from China in October, the already negative perceptions of the President of the European Commission became much more intense. However, Chinese news agencies and social media praised Macron's remarks following his visit to China in April, emphasizing that Europe should resist pressure to become America's follower of Taiwan. With China, where is the EU heading? The EU has brought up several vital problems in its interactions with China, most notably the significant trade deficit. China's trade surplus with the EU reached a record high of $434.96 billion in 2022 to 2023, this illustrates the extent of this economic gap. Despite this, several European nations consider trade with China essential to their economic goals, and some even see it as a way to resolve the Russia-Ukraine dispute. Some voices advise against a lenient stance toward China and jumping into business dealings with it. European leaders' visits to China this year have delivered little concessions that line with European interests, whether about Russia's aggression or commercial ties, is the consensus among European analysts. Instead, these trips were seen as a display of European division, which left Europe's China policy in a chaotic state. The EU, however, continues to take a steadfast and consistent stand against China. Even while some individual countries have expressed a desire for increased interaction with China, von der Leyen's statements have not wavered. The European Commission designated the nation as a systematic adversary in 2019, a stance that von der Leyen repeatedly reiterated in speeches made that year. We must acknowledge the explicit presence of rivalry in our relationship. At a Merck's seminar on November 16, she reaffirmed, "We also need to recognize that China's views on the global security architecture are not automatically aligned with ours." Nevertheless, the fact that nations like Germany and France are still influencing their own China policies complicates the development of a cohesive EU policy. Conversely, China's approach to the EU is akin to its policy towards ASEAN: divide, dominate, and conquer. Everyone agrees that the EU does not have a compelling and balanced approach to China. The EU and its member states must acknowledge that China benefits from a fragmented Europe at their own expense. States in the EU must genuinely align themselves to address China's challenges. The next summit between the EU and China may allow the EU to project unity and safeguard its long-term interests. That cohesiveness, though, doesn't appear likely just now.